Welcome back to another edition of the Hawk Off the Press podcast. I'm your host, Gazette Hawkeyes reporter, John Steppe. I am joined by my counterpart at the Des Moines Register, Kennington, Lloyd Smith. Kenny, I should probably start off by congratulating you. It's a big day this week with your beloved Georgia Bulldogs winning against Alabama on Monday.
Yeah, that was just like an incredible day. It was my birthday that day. So the whole day, it was just like, this could either be the best day ever or send me into like a spiraling depression. So it was incredible to win. It's really hard to put into words, honestly. Like when Keely Ringo was taking that pick six back, like I probably got a noise complaint somewhere in my mailbox or in my email. I was just screaming at the top of my lungs. My parents called me. And we were just like yelling at each other back and forth on the phone, like we're the best in the world. We won, we did it. And it was really emotional. Of course, you know, from the outside looking in, people look at Georgia from the context of, you know, Kirby Smart gets there. We've had all these close matchups against Alabama, but my whole life as a Georgia fan has been traumatic. Even though we've had super talented rosters, we've put a lot of players into the NFL. We've caught tough breaks or had tough losses that go as far back, at least 15 years, that I can just roll off the top of my head. I'll save you the time because it could take an hour that will fill up all the painful breaks and all the heartbreaking losses that we've had over the years. But to see the team finally break through that ceiling, and the ultimate stigma that was around Georgia's program is, you know, the physical talent is there, but mentally, you know, can we overcome Alabama? Are we afraid of the boogeyman? Like, you know, can we finally get past that? So to break that stigma, to break that narrative, I honestly feel like, you know, we are about to walk into what is going to be the golden ages of our football program, which is pretty crazy because we've been, you know, of course, we've been successful. We won New Year's 6 games. But now to get that first national championship, I imagine that the momentum off of this is going to be incredible. So it's great to be a Georgia Bulldog. The year 2022 is off to an excellent start, and I can't wait to see what happens next. And thank you for having me on again.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, they couldn't pull off the undefeated season, unlike my alma mater that had yet another undefeated football season. But, you know, winning the CFP is not a bad consolation prize there.
Yeah, not at all. And the way that we did it, to lose in the SEC championship and to see the disappointment and how it happened, there was a lot of Georgia fans that were not really looking forward to the playoffs because it just seemed like the classic story of, oh, this team is so good, we're finally going to do it. We fall on our face, and it's like, yeah, we'll beat Michigan. That was not a great matchup for Michigan. They're a great team, but just stylistically, they were overmatched in that game. So we were confident that we would win that game. But then it's like, okay, are we just going to beat Michigan and lose to Alabama again and walk away with no national championship? So to win the game and to see kind of our wildest dreams, you know, come true. And I don't know if you've seen on Twitter, but me, of course, being tapped into UGA Twitter, there's just so many videos on timelines of people just like crying and falling on the floor, you know, watching the video, you know, the reaction videos and everything. So I shed a few tears myself. I'm not ashamed to admit that. So I couldn't have asked for it to happen, you know, in any other way. Like we knew we were going to have to beat Alabama to do it. So they can take the SEC championship and we'll walk away with the big boy trophy.
Well, one day you'll get the undefeated season, just like my alma mater always gets. But switching gears here a little bit to Iowa, before you can point out any flaws in my pointing out Marquette football undefeated. So switching gears here, we got a little bit of news here with the 2022 Big Ten schedule adjustment. So now we know actually who Iowa will play when, is more specifically the change. It worked out pretty well here for the Hawkeyes. First of all, I think the biggest thing that really jumps out at me, at least, is that bye week moving from after the Ohio State game to before the Ohio State game. A little bit of a break there earlier in the season that I think is much needed.
Absolutely. When you look at what their original schedule was supposed to be, the first 4 games at Minnesota, Michigan, at Purdue, at Ohio State, then you have the bye week. That is about as tough of a 4-game stretch as you'll find in conference play, period, across any conference, any division, doesn't matter where you play. I'm looking at potentially 4 ranked teams in a row. Honestly, we'll see where Minnesota and Purdue's preseason hype is, but that, Purdue was a team that, they won 8 or 9 games. They played in a pretty late December bowl game. Minnesota has, a lot of momentum off of beating
And
Wisconsin.
Purdue, a team that really does not match up well
Right.
for the Hawkeyes too.
Exactly. Road game at Minnesota, who had a big bowl win as well. So those are teams with momentum. We'll see how they're ranked. Obviously, Michigan and Ohio State are going to be ranked, and those are going to be tough games in their own right. So to have those 4 in a row before going into a bye week, you have to imagine that the team going into that bye week would be pretty beat up, because those are just going to be physical, tough games, some of the best teams in the conference. So looking at it now, what they're going to have with at Rutgers, home against Michigan, at Illinois in the bye week, those are still going to be tough games, of course. But you feel a lot better about having 2 weeks to prepare for Ohio State versus we just ran a gauntlet of 3 tough games. Now we have to play Ohio State. The bye week is right there. Can we just get to that point? So you have a chance to. I'm looking at these first 3 games. I think all 3 games are winnable. Honestly, if you get 2 out of 3, I feel like you'll feel good about it going into the bye week against Ohio State, and then the rest of the Big Ten schedule. So
they definitely playing Michigan at home helps a lot too. With
right, definitely. So we saw
it can't go any worse than how it went in the Big Ten championship game.
Right, and we saw the early October magic with the Penn State game. You have to imagine that Kinnick is going to be rocking at the same level of intensity, if not a higher level of intensity with that game, with the Big Ten championship, with Michigan running up the score to get style points in the Big Ten championship, the way that they did. So that game is going to be huge. And that's something that the fans are really going to have to embrace. And this is what I was going to say. Like, we are talking about the good breaks, the bad break, and the toughest break is from September 24th to October 29th. You only get 1 home game, and that's the Michigan game. So a lot of time away from home. Playing on the road is obviously tough, but those are some really tough road matchups. So that even, I think, takes the Michigan game into a higher level of importance, if it is even possible for that game to be even more important. It's like, we have 1 home game in a month. We have to win that game.
It's going to be a long time to dwell on that one. If you don't win against Michigan, Northwestern is going to be a long time there for that to stew in terms of the last time that you win at home. So right. I think this is really the marquee matchup. And you compared it to Penn State, and even the week, it's 1 week off in comparison. Right. Michigan, October 1. I think Penn State was October 9th, if I'm remembering correctly.
I believe so. Yeah.
Like, even the same time of year. So that's the one that kind of jumps out at me as well. It's going to be a great game.
Right, definitely. And then, like I said, I think the bad blood element as well. I don't think that Iowa and Penn State had any like super big bad blood going into that game. These are just 2 teams that played each other very closely. They've had tough matchups, but now, obviously the next time that they play, there's going to be a little bit added there. But I likened it to this Michigan game just for the reasons that I said earlier. Big Ten championship foe. Michigan obviously accelerated when the game was well in hand. Trying to get a high seed in the college football playoff. Unfortunately, I was on the other end of that. So, that's something that the players who were on last year's team, who are going to return this year, they're going to remember that. They're going to want to mark it on that calendar and have a similar showing to what happened in the Penn State game this year.
And then it's going to be a cold end to the season, I think, with that Minnesota trip, second last week. Are you ready? Do you have enough winter jackets for that?
I honestly don't know. Like, what I'll say about the winter out here is, and this might sound crazy, when it's not windy outside, it's honestly not that unbearable. Like, when it's even sub-zero temperatures are in the single digits, if it's like calm wind, I feel like I have what it takes to go out there in a jacket and my layers and feel okay. Wind chill, forget about it. That's the true culprit. But going into Minnesota, people, fans have been tweeting me, asking me, good luck, saying good luck, or sending me the cold face emojis. If it's like a blizzard or something, like I haven't been in a blizzard yet. So when the last time it was like a foot of snow, we were in Orlando, so we came back to the snow.
Yeah.
I haven't been in a situation where like I've been here and like I see it coming down for myself, or I've had to drive in the snow or anything like that. So y'all probably have to get Chad to make that drive to Minnesota so my anxiety doesn't take over. So I have to talk to him about that. But I hope a year from now I'll be much more acclimated to the Iowa cold than I am right now.
And the Iowa roads is probably the even bigger part of that.
Yeah. Well, when we came back from the Citrus Bowl, the roads were pretty clear. So I haven't had a chance to go out there and drive when the roads aren't as clear. I'm not trying to manifest that either. I hope that the good people of Iowa, if there's any people who are watching this podcast or watch this podcast who are responsible for paving the roads, let me be the first to tell you that you're doing a fantastic job. You need to continue to do that great job to protect people like me who have no idea what they're doing.
Well, the roster for 2022, obviously a lot can change. There's still the transfer portal that's not going away anytime soon. It has been interesting, though, to see who's opting in, who's opting out in terms of that extra year, most notably getting Riley Moss back. Hard to really underscore enough how much having an experienced cornerback like Moss. And you kind of wonder, too, what would have happened had he not had that injury there midway through the season? He was on quite a roll before that.
Yeah, he was definitely in line for, if not the Thorpe Award, he for sure would have been a finalist if he would have played a healthy year. Maybe that missing that 3-game stretch, that could have included a matchup against Purdue with David Bell. They have marquee receivers over there. That was an opportunity that he missed to kind of showcase himself on that stage. So maybe there's some draft element there. But honestly, I see him, and even we don't know what Tyler Linderbaum is going to do yet, but I just see players like them, the Charlie Jones, who, if they're not from Iowa, just kind of like local-ish kids who like truly love the university. They've dreamed of playing for this university, and they just they want to ride that out for as long as they can. We wish them all good health and hope that the NFL is always something that's going to be there. But the time to play for Iowa right now is very short. So this whole one last ride, I kind of seeing that, that could potentially be something that is a storyline going into next year. If we see, the remaining players left in the pot decide to come back. So that's kind of my read on the situation. But like you said, that's a huge win for Iowa to have him back, especially because Dane Belton is going to the league. We already knew Matt Hankins was going to go to the league. Jack Kerner announced as well. So we're looking at a situation where Kayvon Merriweather could have been the only returning starter. If we look at, true day one consistent starters, obviously, I feel like we have
the injury throw in.
Exactly. I think at this point we can consider Jamari Harris a returning starter because of how many games he started at the end of the year. But like looking at what it would be without injuries, that's pretty much the entire secondary that will be moving on. So that's going to be huge to have Riley back. I think it gives a little bit of position versatility back there, but you have to think that the cornerback position, even though you're losing somebody as talented as Matt Hankins, that the position is going to be as strong going into next year as it was this year.
Oh yeah, when you have Moss, when you have Harris, you have, how could I not mention earlier, Terry Roberts.
Right.
Those three right there, you'd probably order it as Moss, Roberts, Harris. It's a pretty good trio right there. And Harris, when he was thrown in those first couple games, it looked like he was just hanging in there, but he really stepped up there throughout that last kind of final stretch of the season. And, that goes a long ways going into a fresh season. And, that's a pretty good foundation there. And maybe some of those injuries, the silver lining is going to be, hey, now Jamari Harris has seen a little more experience. You've got other guys there who've seen a little more experience going into whatever this 2022 defense looks like.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And the thing about Jamari is kind of what you said. We know what he is, and what he is a legitimate cornerback one. Probably wouldn't be if Riley Moss stays outside. Obviously, he's going to be cornerback one, but Jamari has that ability. We saw it in the bowl game. That was probably his best game. Got the interception at the end of the game. And one thing I'll say about Jamari Harris and what I'm looking forward to next year, we got a chance to talk to him after the Citrus Bowl, and he is as engaging, well-spoken, energetic, insightful a player that we've spoken to, which is saying a lot because we in Iowa media, a lot of the players that we talked to, pretty much every single player that we've talked to throughout the season is that exact same way. We had that Golden Gavel Award. We gave it to the player who's like most cooperative with the media, kind of exemplifies the principles. Honestly, there are at least 10 guys that I can think of off the top of my head that could have won that award.
Yeah.
And if we got a chance to talk to Jamari throughout the year, he definitely would have been a consideration. I feel like he'll be in consideration next year. I feel like we're going to talk to him a lot. So excited for us to get to know him more, excited for the fans to see a lot more of him in our video interviews and just the quotes that we have from him throughout the season. And he seems very ready and willing to step into a leadership role next year, which is going to be needed because there's going to be a lot of young secondary players coming in, potentially some young secondary players forced into playing positions, just depending on how things may shake out. So he's definitely, if we're looking or making a list of top players to watch or breakout stars on the team or just in the Big Ten, he's got to be near the top of that list.
Yeah, especially when he gets an off season where he's already, I think going into this off season, he wasn't really expecting to be thrown into this big of a role.
Right.
Now he's had that in-game experience. He can develop for an off season. I'm really excited to see what he does. I'm also excited to see the offensive line because even if Tyler Linderbaum goes pro, and who would blame him for going if he ends up doing that route, projected first round pick. And I think pretty much every single mock draft, right. I think anybody who doesn't have Tyler Linderbaum in the first round needs to reevaluate why they're putting together mock drafts.
Right.
But, even if he's gone, got some more experience on that line. And I think that's going to be a really interesting position group where it wasn't their greatest year in 2021, but it could turn into a strength again for the Iowa offense. And I think that would help too, because quarterback play has not been spectacular. And when you've got a good offensive line, that makes everything else a little better.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think that the offensive line, even without Linderbaum, you would have to assume or predict that they were going to take a step forward next year. And this is a group that, we have to remember they got off to such a rocky start going into the year. You had Cody Ince, who was kind of like a star of spring practice, somebody who the coaches said, this is someone who could play all five positions. We might want to move him out to tackle. He had injuries, so that wasn't able to come into form. You lose Kyler Schott right before the season. Ince is still battling injuries. Justin Britt is battling injuries. Mason Richmond got hurt towards the end of the year. You had Connor Colby, who during the Kids Day scrimmage was projected to play tackle, and then going into the season, now he's playing guard. And it was just kind of a makeshift group. And it seemed like
Colby too, somebody who was playing high school football a year ago.
Exactly. He was a true freshman himself. So it kind of seemed like week by week, we just didn't know what offensive line we were going to see. I feel like as media members, we're in the press box. That was one of the first things that we tweeted every Saturday for pregame warmups. Like, okay, who's going to be the first offensive line group? But Richmond is coming back at tackle. He's going to be strong. Obviously, Connor Colby is extremely talented. We know he's going to take a step forward. Ince and Britt, if you can get them fully healthy and fully ready to go, then you're going to be strong on the interior. And then there's some true freshmen that offensive coordinator Brian Ferentz told us about, the David Davikoffs of the world and others, both Stevens of the world, who've made leaps in bowl practice. And you figure they're going to be in the mix as well. So there's a lot of talent on the offensive line. I feel like they're going to make a huge, step forward. I feel like you could say the same about the defensive line. Those were the two groups that youngest, most inexperienced, and kind of had to go through those growing pains. It's frustrating for fans. That's something that maybe they don't want to hear week to week, like, it's a work in progress, it's a work in progress. They're trying to get better. But I think next year you'll see a lot more of those dividends from the work that was put in this past season.
And the impressive thing with the defensive line, too, is when you look at it statistically, it wasn't a bad year for them. They had a good job getting to the quarterback. They had a good job stopping the run game. It just wasn't quite up to maybe what they've been in past years. So, you get a lot of those people back. Obviously, you don't get Zach Van Valkenburg back, but you get a lot of those guys back, and back on the offensive line, Cody Ince. I was really impressed with the block he made on that Laporta screen pass play, where that really stood out to me. Like, wow, okay, this guy fully healthy, he can play some good football on the line. So
right.
It'll be an interesting area at the line of scrimmage for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then to go into the defensive line, this is a group that played almost like 9 players at their fullest strength. I don't know if fullest is a word, but you know what I'm trying to say. At full tilt, they played.
We're gonna invent words here.
Right. Exactly. This is your podcast. You can make the rules. So fullest is a word on this podcast. But at full tilt, they played almost 9, 10 players. We didn't even count Logan Jones, who we know is talented in a weight room maven, but he's just battled injuries. So you're going to get him back along the defensive line as well. So that group, you're going to have veteran leadership on the line. You're going to have Noah Shannon, who's going to be a senior, I believe, Joe Evans, John Wagner, who are going to be seniors, I believe, next year. So you're going to have
Lucas Van Ness, who's still young.
Right. Lucas Van Ness is young. Logan Jones is young. Y.A. Black, young. Deontay Craig, young. So you have a lot of youth and talent along with veteran experience. So I imagine the lines of play is going to be much improved. But it kind of goes back to the first question. The first thing that we talked about is like better team, much more difficult schedule. It's going to be kind of interesting to weigh how we view the team or how the season unfolds with what we've been talking about in terms of the roster and how optimistic fans should be about the roster, which I feel like they should. I feel like they're at pretty much, almost every position, you feel like they're going to take some type of step forward. There's going to be questions and others. Running back, obviously, you're losing a 3-year starter. We don't know what's going to happen with quarterback. But everywhere else, you feel like, we have definitive answers, or we kind of know in the direction of where we're going, but they're playing a much difficult schedule also.
And even at running back, the 2 Williams really impressed. So you've got that. There's some reason for optimism, granted with a very, very small sample size with just one game in the Citrus Bowl. Right. But yeah, you point out the difficulty of the schedule. 5-2 is this year in Big Ten play in the regular season. And I think people will be beyond thrilled. Maybe I'll make up a word here. I can't even think of a word to make up here. But something 8 times above thrilled if they go 5-2 this year, because that schedule, Michigan is no cakewalk. Neither is Ohio State. And then you still have the same pesky teams. You've got Purdue that beat Iowa pretty handily. You've got Wisconsin that beat Iowa pretty handily this year. And, Nebraska, who knows what they're going to do, but it looked for a half like they were going to beat Iowa pretty handily.
Yeah. And then, Nebraska, they're bringing in Casey Thompson from Texas. So they're trying to ramp up via the portal. There's a chance that we're going to see teams next year that maybe look different, maybe more talented than the teams that we saw Iowa play this year. And that's an interesting point. When I first looked at the schedule for this year, what I did was I kind of put the teams in tiers of, these are the games that Iowa should win outright. These are the games that it could go either way, that you would hope to split, and then there are just like literal toss-ups. When I'm looking at this year's Big Ten slate, I mean, a lot of these games, I mean, there are games that, you feel like Iowa's going to be favored in. I think Illinois is going to be one they're going to be favored in. I think they'll be favored in the Rutgers game. I think they'll be favored in the Northwestern game. But even still, the teams, those are teams, not Rutgers, but Illinois and Northwestern, they played this year, and those games were close. We talked about this before we actually started recording, that the way that Iowa plays, and you're not really going to have the offense, at least if we're looking at it, let's say we take the same offensive philosophy and maybe their scoring prowess from this year's team and you apply it to next year with the same defense, they're going to be a good team. But with that style of play, you're really not going to blow a lot of teams out unless it's just something like a Maryland game where the defense is forcing a lot of turnovers, setting the offense up, et cetera. So these are going to be, close games, tough games, pretty much all the way down the slate. So to come out with the same record that they had last year, I think would be extremely impressive. And you feel like that record would give you an opportunity to win the division title again. It's going to be tough down the stretch, but I think that if there's a silver lining outside of Ohio State and Purdue, a lot of these, the big Big Ten games like the Michigans, Wisconsin, Nebraska down the stretch are going to be huge games for Big Ten play. Those are at home. So
yeah,
gotta
it is
rely
a
on
favorable draw there to get. Now you're not going to get both Michigan and Ohio State most likely, but to get one of those, I mean, that helps you out. Wisconsin helps you out. Nebraska at the end of the year helps you out. So I certainly won't mind not doing the Thanksgiving drive over to Lincoln this year. So
yeah,
but
definitely stay
yeah,
local.
it's a good draw there for, there are gonna be some competitive games at Kinnick in 2022.
Right. And then for the fans, to not have a lot of home games in the part of the year where it's best to be outside, or I don't want to say best to be outside, but you
Most comfortable to be
most
outside.
comfortable. Most comfortable. Like from what of course, people who are from here or from the Midwest in general, they do not mind going out in cold weather. But in the peak of fall season this year, where there were a lot of home games in the beginning, just kind of going out, getting a chance to take in the atmosphere and just see how strong the tailgate culture is. There's not going to be a lot of that next year just because of how the schedule shook. But towards the end of the year where you have a lot of crucial games, that home field advantage can come into play down the stretch, and hopefully, lift the team to having some big wins down the stretch. At least that's, the hope of the fans and the players and coaches, of course.
Yeah, anyone who is grilling out burgers, I'm sure people will, but anybody who's grilling out burgers in November, I give you extra kudos there with that. Some of those late games could be a little toasty. Granted, this year was unseasonably warm, but yeah, I wouldn't bet on that happening every year. So yeah, it's not the greatest home schedule here for your hot dog, brat, burger perusing in the parking lot.
Right. All right.
It's funny, you see sometimes the Bowl Scouts go out and kind of circle the stadium, see the sights. Like, I don't think if the Citrus Bowl Scouts are at Kinnick this year, they're going to be too eager to venture around the stadium and, cold, maybe close to zero temperatures.
Right.
We'll see how much their Florida skin can thicken by game time.
Exactly. Well, for the fans, I'm sure, if you polled, the fans that, would you rather have a lot of home games at the beginning of the season, or you can backload the schedule with home games and potentially be the difference in winning a division title or not? I'm sure they would take the latter. So not ideal for the fans, but if it turns out the way at the end of the year, maybe similar this year where Iowa can secure a Big Ten championship in the last week of the season, last 2 weeks of the season, home game, maybe fans might have had something to do with it. We've seen the fans cause false starts, cause confusion on offenses. I imagine that they're going to continue to do that next year. And it's kind of like what you said earlier about the North, it's a long time until that Northwestern game. You got to imagine that the fans are just going to be itching to get back into the stadium, and that's just going to create a lot more ruckus in the stadium and more rowdy crowds just because I haven't been there in so long.
Yeah. So it'll be a fun year ahead. My biggest question for this offseason is quarterback. I'm not sure if that's the same for you or if you have another one.
I think it's just the direction of the offense in general, but the quarterback being the most important position, it has to start there.
Yeah, because the quarterback play this year, whether it's Peterson, whether it's Padilla in, that most years is not going to win you a Big Ten West title. It wouldn't with this schedule, that's for sure.
Right. So you're right. I think that when we're looking at the offense, the three things, or maybe you can even lump in two of these things, but obviously what happens at offensive coordinator and what happens at quarterback is going to maybe define the offseason energy from maybe like fans or media perspective going into the year. The way that I look at it is, and I am new to the area, so I am not as tapped into the nuances of the football program as the fans are who have watched this team for years. But I have gotten the sense that they are not confident that anything is going to change on the offense. I push back on that a little bit just because I understand stubbornness, and that's something that I've had to deal with as a Georgia fan when we've had a more traditional offense, and we just switched to a spread before last season. And I didn't think that was going to happen. And it did, because at the end of the day, like, these coaches are not blind. They see what's happening. You can't change your scheme in season. And at least to me, what I got from this year is it seemed to me that every game Iowa played past a certain point was, what can we do offensively to win this game at this time? And we're just going to do the same thing every week. Like, we saw some wrinkles of the offense in one week that worked well, and then we wouldn't see those wrinkles again. They went to another strategy in another game. So I said all that to say, going into the offseason, if we're looking at getting a quarterback out of the transfer portal, finding a new offensive coordinator, or changing the philosophy, I don't think all of those will happen, but I feel like at least one of those things is going to happen. I think that the most likely is changing the philosophy.
That one's the one that doesn't require not having another Ferentz in the building.
Right, exactly. So if Brian Ferentz he's young, he's in his 30s, I believe. He is not incapable of changing the scheme and adding fresh ideas, but ultimately that's going to come from the top. So if you feel that he is the person that can engineer some change, then I would not have a problem bringing the same offensive staff back with a newer philosophy. They could bring in maybe a co-offensive coordinator, and we saw Michigan do this with Josh Gaddis, who was the Boyles Award winner for top assistant of the year. LSU did this with Joe Brady. They won a national championship. So I'm not saying that type of change would propel Iowa to a national championship level or a playoff team level, but there's nothing wrong with, and it has actually become very commonplace to bring in a co-offensive coordinator to kind of re-engineer some things, take over the play calling. Brian can still stay on staff. I believe Iowa is full in terms of full-time assistants. So I don't know what would have to take place in order for that to happen. I'm not advocating for anybody losing their job or anything like that. But you know what I mean. There's going to have to be some shuffling around for that type of thing to happen. I feel like that's probably the most likely and tangible outcome if they are going to change anything offensively.
Well, it'll be a fascinating next couple months. Kenny, thanks again for joining the Hawk Off the Press podcast. Words are hard for me now in the off season. So
yeah, I understand. We're not getting the same reps that we've been getting in the season, but
all that turbulence and the flight back, just threw off my game.
Right. If anybody has seen the show Manifest on Netflix, that is legit what the flight home felt like. And if you've never seen the show Manifest, literally just type it in on YouTube. I'm sure it'll pop up the first link. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It was chaotic. It was chaotic to say the least.
Yes, I may have had a few gestures over in Kenny's direction during that flight. So we made it back though in one piece, more or less on time, a little delayed, but
Right.
yeah, it's a new experience.
Absolutely. We're here now. The month of January starting, we're halfway through now. We're, as we start to get into February, it's going to start feeling like, okay, football season is starting to approach again, late signing day. Spring practice will be right around the corner. So, we'll get back into our mid-season form soon enough. And I can't wait. Like, first year was really fun. It flew right by. So I'm ready to just dive back in and continue to do good work.
Yeah. And first full year for me, jumping in midway through. So
right. Exactly.
Yeah, certainly an interesting first year. And, I think it's one that a lot of fans are satisfied with. I put out a Twitter poll. Did this season exceed expectations, meet expectations, or did not meet expectations? And 87% said either meet or exceed. So, obviously you would have liked to win the bowl game, but, a 10-win season doesn't happen every day. And it happened this year. So a lot for Iowa fans to hang their hats on.
Absolutely. Historic season is the only way to describe what 2021 was. Obviously, it didn't end the way that fans wanted it to. But like you said, if you would have told fans before this past season, Iowa's going to win 10 games, would you take it? They would have 10 out of 10 times. You would take a 10-win season. So the way that it happened, maybe not ideal. Some of the wins that they had maybe lost luster because the other team that they beat didn't follow through the rest of the season. That doesn't have anything
to do Penn State.
Right. That doesn't have anything to do with Iowa, though, and that shouldn't take away from the magnitude of that win at that time. The fact that Penn State finished the season 7-6 or whatever is not take away from the fact that at that moment it was a top 4 matchup. It was one of the biggest games, like a game of the century. People were calling it, and they won that game. Like, you have to look at it from that lens of what it meant at that time. Iowa State didn't have the season that they were expecting to have, but that was the 7th straight win over your rival. You brought home the trophy. That was an on the road top 10 win to kind of maintain the dominance in state. So though you kind of have to look at it from that type of lens when characterizing what this season meant. So 10 wins. If the 13%, I understand maybe why they would say it didn't meet expectations, but that's something to not turn your nose up at, because that's that doesn't happen often at many programs across the country. Not just a school like Iowa. It's tough to reach that mark, and maybe it's easy to look at the Georgias and the Bamas and the Ohio States and just like, oh, that's just supposed to happen. Like that's not commonplace.
Well, Kenny, thanks again for joining the pod.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And thanks again to our listeners for listening to another episode of the Hawk Off the Press podcast. Until next week, we will talk Hawks later.